The security footage showed everything. Rebecca Martinez had been walking exactly 50 feet behind his daughter Emma every single morning for 3 weeks, ducking behind trees, hiding behind parked cars, watching from the shadows like some kind of stalker. When tech billionaire David Richardson first saw the footage from his home security system, his blood ran cold. His trusted housekeeper, the woman he'd allowed into his home, around his precious 8-year-old daughter, had been secretly following Emma to school. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what the cameras couldn't capture, what David would soon discover, would shatter everything he thought he knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. Sometimes the people we trust most carry secrets that could destroy us. Other times, those same secrets reveal a love so profound it breaks us open in the most beautiful way imaginable. David Richardson had built his empire on algorithms and cold logic. At 35, he commanded a tech company, worth $3 billion from his glass fortress overlooking San Francisco Bay, his penthouse. Office on the 40th floor of the Richardson Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view most people only saw in magazines. Everything in his life was calculated, measured, optimized for maximum efficiency. Everything except the one variable he couldn't control. His daughter Emma, 8 years old with wild auburn curls and eyes the color of storm clouds. Emma was the only thing left in David's life that still felt real. After his wife Sarah died in a car accident 2 years ago, David had retreated into work the way other men retreat into bottles. The numbers on spreadsheets made sense. Market projections followed patterns. Code did exactly what you told it to do. People, especially 8-year-old people with questions about why mommy wasn't coming home, were infinitely more complicated. The morning everything changed started like any other. David stood in his marble-lined kitchen at 6:30 sharp, scrolling through overnight emails on his phone, while his Italian espresso machine hissed to life. The kitchen itself was a monument to modern efficiency. Granite countertops that cost more than most people's cars, appliances that looked like they belonged on a spaceship, and not a single thing out of place. David liked order. He needed it. Emma sat at the breakfast bar in her private school uniform, a navy blazer and plaid skirt that cost $800 and made her look like a tiny executive. She was picking at a bowl of organic steel-cut oats that their nutritionist had specifically recommended, but David could see she wasn't really eating. She never really ate anymore. "Emma, you need to finish your breakfast," David said, without looking up from his phone, his voice carrying the same tone he used in board meetings. "You have exactly 12 minutes before Rebecca walks you to school." Emma's spoon clinked against the ceramic bowl. "Can't you walk me today, Daddy?" The question hit David like a physical blow, but he'd learned to deflect these moments with practiced efficiency. "You know I have the quarterly presentation this morning. The investors from Tokyo are calling in at 7:15. "But you always have meetings." David finally looked up from his phone, and for just a moment he saw Sarah in Emma's face. The same stubborn set to her jaw, the same way her eyebrows drew together when she was disappointed. It was like looking at a ghost, and David had to look away. "Rebecca will take good care of you," he said, his voice softer now. "She always does." Rebecca Martinez appeared in the kitchen doorway as if summoned by her name. At 42, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible, while still managing every detail of a household. She had worked for the Richardson family for 6 months now, ever since David's previous housekeeper had quit with 2 days' notice, claiming the job was too demanding. Rebecca had been different from the start. She didn't complain about David's impossible standards or his tendency to change his schedule at the last minute. She simply adapted, the way water adapts to whatever container holds it. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson. Good morning, sweet pea," Rebecca said, her voice warm in a way that made Emma's face brighten immediately. She had called Emma Sweet Pea from her very first day, and somehow the nickname had stuck in a way that made David slightly uncomfortable. It was too familiar, too intimate for an employee. Rebecca was attractive in an understated way that David tried not to notice. She had dark hair that she always kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and kind brown eyes that seemed to see everything. She dressed practically in dark jeans and simple blouses, nothing that would draw attention to herself. But there was something about the way she moved, the way she anticipated needs before they were spoken, that made her presence felt in every room. "I made your lunch, Emma," Rebecca said, holding up a small insulated bag. "Turkey and avocado on whole grain, apple slices and those yogurt tubes you like." Emma's face lit up. "Did you cut the apple slices like stars?" "Of course I did. What kind of lunch would it be without star apples?" David watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. Rebecca had a way with Emma that he'd lost somewhere in the 2 years since Sarah died. She could make his daughter smile with something as simple as star-shaped apple slices, while David's presence seemed to make Emma withdraw further into herself. "We should go," Rebecca said gently, checking the slim watch on her wrist. "We don't want to be late." Emma slid down from her stool, leaving her oats mostly untouched. She grabbed her backpack, a designer piece that cost more than Rebecca probably made in a week, and headed toward the door. At the last second, she turned back to David. "Bye, Daddy." "Have a good day at school," David replied, but he was already looking at his phone again, scrolling through the morning's stock reports. He didn't see the way Emma's shoulders slumped slightly as she turned away. He didn't see the look that passed between Emma and Rebecca, a moment of understanding that spoke of conversations he wasn't part of. He was already lost in the digital world where everything made sense, and nothing asked him to be anything other than successful. Rebecca took Emma's hand as they left the penthouse, and David was alone with his espresso and his empire of glass and steel. Rebecca Martinez had learned to make herself invisible long before she started working for the Richardson family. It was a skill she'd developed growing up in East Oakland, where being noticed by the wrong people could mean the difference between safety and danger. Even now, walking through the pristine neighborhoods of Pacific Heights with Emma skipping beside her, Rebecca felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't meant for people like her. The walk to Emma's school took exactly 18 minutes if they maintained a steady pace. But Rebecca had learned to add extra time for Emma's tendency to stop and examine every interesting rock, flower, or stray cat they encountered. Today, Emma was unusually quiet, her small hand warm in Rebecca's as they navigated the steep sidewalks that overlooked the bay. "You're thinking very hard about something?" Rebecca observed as they paused at a crosswalk. Emma looked up at her with those storm-grey eyes that were so much like her mother's. Rebecca had seen photos of Sarah Richardson throughout the penthouse, beautiful images of a woman who had clearly been David's whole world. In every picture, Sarah was laughing or smiling, her arm around David or holding baby Emma. The photo stopped abruptly 2 years ago, as if happiness itself had died in that car accident. "Daddy doesn't really see me anymore," Emma said quietly. The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the chest. She knelt down on the sidewalk, not caring about the expensive suit-wearing commuters who had to walk around them. "What do you mean, sweet pea?" Emma's bottom lip trembled slightly. "He looks at me, but he doesn't see me. Like when you look at the TV, but you're thinking about something else. That's how Daddy looks at me now." Rebecca felt her heart break a little more. In 6 months of working for the Richardson family, she had watched David retreat further and further into his work, while Emma became smaller and quieter. The little girl was disappearing, and her father was too lost in his own grief to notice. "Your daddy loves you very much," Rebecca said carefully. "Sometimes when grown-ups are very sad, they forget how to show their love properly. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Were you ever sad like that?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She had been very careful to keep her own story separate from her work, but Emma had a way of asking questions that cut straight to the truth. "Yes," Rebecca admitted. "I was sad like that once. What made you not sad anymore?" Rebecca stood up and took Emma's hand again as the walk signal changed. How could she explain to an 8-year-old that some sadness never really goes away? It just learns to live alongside hope. How could she tell Emma that she had lost her own daughter 5 years ago, and that being with Emma was both a gift and a daily reminder of everything she'd lost? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I think, Rebecca said carefully, that sadness gets smaller when you have someone to take care of. When you have a reason to be brave. Emma squeezed her hand. Am I your reason to be brave? Rebecca had to swallow hard before she could answer. You are definitely one of my reasons, sweet pea. They turned the corner onto the street where Emma's private school stood like a small castle, all red brick and ivy-covered walls. Presidio Academy was the kind of school where tuition cost more than most people's annual salaries, where children of tech billionaires and venture capitalists learned alongside the offspring of old San Francisco money. Emma fit in perfectly on paper. She had the right clothes, the right supplies, the right address. But Rebecca had noticed that Emma always seemed a little lost among her classmates, like she was speaking a different language, even when she was using the same words. There's Sophia and Madison, Emma said, pointing to 2 girls near the school entrance. They were surrounded by other children, all of them laughing at something one of them had said. Why don't you go say hello? Rebecca suggested. Emma hesitated. They're talking about their weekend plans. Sophia's family is going to Napa Valley to taste wines, and Madison's parents are taking her to a spa in Sonoma. They always do things like that. What would you like to do this weekend? I want to go to the park and feed the ducks. Or maybe bake cookies. Mom used to let me help her make chocolate chip cookies every Sunday. Emma's voice got smaller. But Daddy doesn't know how to make cookies, and he's always working anyway. Rebecca felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one that came whenever Emma mentioned something she missed about her mother. Rebecca had become an expert at recognizing the signs of a child who was drowning in a world of adults who didn't know how to throw her a life preserver. Well, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice light, maybe we could make cookies this weekend. If your daddy says it's okay. Emma's face brightened. Really? You know how to make chocolate chip cookies. I know how to make the best chocolate chip cookies in the entire Bay Area, Rebecca said with mock seriousness. It's a secret family recipe. Will you teach me? I would love to teach you. The school bell rang, and Emma reluctantly shouldered her backpack. She looked up at Rebecca with an expression that was far too serious for an 8-year-old. Rebecca. Yes, sweet pea. I'm glad Daddy hired you, even if he did it just because Mrs. Hoffman quit and he needed someone to take care of me. Rebecca knelt down again and pulled Emma into a hug. The little girl smelled like vanilla shampoo and childhood, and for a moment Rebecca allowed herself to pretend that this was her daughter, that she was just another mother dropping her child off at school. I'm glad he hired me too, Rebecca whispered. Now go learn something amazing today. Emma ran toward the school entrance, her auburn curls bouncing with each step. She turned back once to wave, and Rebecca waved back until Emma disappeared through the heavy wooden doors. Rebecca stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the last few stragglers hurry into the building. She checked her watch and realized she had an hour before she needed to be back at the penthouse to start David's impossible list of daily tasks. An hour of freedom in a city that felt both familiar and foreign to her. She turned and began walking back toward Pacific Heights, but instead of taking the direct route, she found herself walking past the school again, then around the block, then past the school one more time. She told herself she was just making sure Emma had made it inside safely. She told herself she was being thorough, professional. She told herself a lot of things that weren't quite the truth. The truth was that leaving Emma felt like abandoning her, even though she knew the little girl was safe inside the prestigious walls of Presidio Academy. The truth was that every morning when she walked away from that school, Rebecca felt like she was failing someone who depended on her in ways that went far beyond her job description. So she walked past the school one more time, just to be sure. just to feel like she was still protecting the little girl who had somehow become the center of her carefully reconstructed world. Rebecca didn't notice the security camera mounted on the building across the street, or the way it tracked her movement as she made her third pass by the school. She didn't think about how her behavior might look to someone watching the footage later. She was only thinking about Emma, alone in that building, surrounded by children who had things Emma didn't have, parents who showed up, families who did things together, mothers who were still alive to make Sunday cookies. Rebecca made it 4 blocks before she turned around and walked past the school one more time. David Richardson's daily routine was calibrated to the minute. After Rebecca left with Emma, he had exactly 43 minutes to review his presentation notes, check the Asian markets, and arrive at his office before his 7:15 call with the Tokyo investors. He gathered his laptop bag and headed for the private elevator that would take him directly to the parking garage where his Tesla waited, already preheated to exactly 72 degrees. The drive to Richardson Tower took 12 minutes in light traffic, and David used every one of those minutes to prep for the day ahead. His Bluetooth earpiece fed him updates from his assistant, while he navigated the San Francisco streets with the efficiency of someone who had made this trip 1,000 times before. "Mr. Richardson, your 9 o'clock with the venture capital team has been moved to 9:30. His assistant Miranda's voice filled the car. "The 10:15 with marketing is confirmed, and I've rescheduled your lunch with the Seattle partners to 1:30 to accommodate the board meeting that got moved to noon." David nodded even though Miranda couldn't see him. "What about the security system update I requested last week?" "The installation was completed yesterday evening. The new cameras are active, and you can access the feeds through the app on your phone. The system covers all exterior approaches to the penthouse, plus the building lobby and elevator banks." David had ordered the security upgrade after reading about a break-in at another tech executive's home in Marin County. When you were worth $3 billion, paranoia wasn't just reasonable, it was necessary. He'd had the most advanced system money could buy installed throughout his building, with particular focus on monitoring anyone who came near his home or his daughter. "Good. Send me the access codes." "Already in your email, sir." "Is there anything else before your Tokyo call?" David pulled into his reserved parking space and gathered his things. "That's all for now. Hold my calls during the presentation unless it's an emergency." Richardson Tower rose 42 stories above the financial district, a gleaming monument to David's success. He had designed the building himself, back when he still cared about things like architecture and aesthetics. Now it was simply the most efficient space possible for running his empire. The lobby was all marble and steel, with a waterfall that cost more than most people's houses and served no purpose except to remind visitors that they were entering a place where money was no object. David's private elevator whisked him to the 40th floor in less than a minute. His office suite took up the entire top level, with conference rooms that could seat 30 people and a private bathroom that was larger than most studio apartments. But the centerpiece was his office itself, a room with windows on 3 sides that offered a view of the entire Bay Area. On clear days, he could see all the way to the mountains. His assistant Miranda was already at her desk outside his office, a cup of his preferred coffee waiting beside a stack of documents that needed his signature. Miranda had worked for him for 3 years, ever since Sarah's death had made him realize he needed someone who could manage the details he no longer had the emotional bandwidth to handle. She was efficient, discreet, and had never once asked him about his personal life. "The Tokyo team is standing by," Miranda said as David passed her desk. "They're eager to hear about the new encryption protocols." David nodded and settled into his office. The presentation went smoothly, as his presentations always did. He had built his company on next-generation security software, and the Tokyo investors were particularly interested in his latest innovation, an AI-powered system that could predict and prevent cyber attacks before they happened. It was the kind of technology that governments and corporations would pay billions to acquire. After the call ended successfully, with the Tokyo team agreeing to a $200 million investment, David allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was what he was good at. This was where he belonged. In this office, making decisions that affected thousands of people and moved markets around the world, he felt in control. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Emma had a good morning at school. Picked up your dry cleaning and restocked the coffee you like. Dinner will be ready at 6:30. David stared at the message for a moment. Rebecca always sent these updates, little reports on the domestic details of his life that he had completely outsourced to her. She managed everything: Emma's schedule, the household staff, his personal shopping, even his social calendar. He had given her access to every aspect of his private life except his emotions. He typed back a quick thank you and returned to his work, but something about the message nagged at him. There was something too careful about Rebecca's communications, too professional. After 6 months, she still treated him like a stranger, like she was walking on glass around him. David told himself he preferred it that way. Professional distance was cleaner, more efficient. The morning flew by in a series of meetings and conference calls. David managed a software team in Seattle, reviewed marketing campaigns for 3 different products, and personally signed off on an acquisition deal that would net his company another $50 million in annual revenue. By lunchtime, he had made decisions that affected hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars, but he hadn't thought about Emma once. It was during his 1:30 lunch meeting with the Seattle partners that Miranda appeared in the doorway of the conference room, her face unusually tense. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Richardson, but you asked me to alert you if there were any security issues at the penthouse." David immediately stood up. "What kind of security issue?" "It's not an emergency," Miranda said quickly, "but the new security system flagged some unusual activity this morning. You should probably review the footage when you have a chance." David's mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios: break-in attempts, stalkers, kidnappers casing his building. When you were as wealthy as David Richardson, there were people who saw your child as a potential target. "Gentlemen, I need to cut this short," David said to the Seattle partners. "Miranda will reschedule for later this week." Back in his office, David opened the security app on his phone and scrolled through the morning's footage. The cameras covered every angle of his building and the surrounding streets, recording in high definition with timestamps accurate to the second. He fast-forwarded through the early morning hours, watching delivery trucks and dog walkers move in, double time, across his screen. At 8:15, he saw Rebecca and Emma leaving the building. Emma was skipping slightly, her backpack bouncing with each step. Rebecca walked beside her, occasionally pointing at something off-camera. They looked comfortable together, natural. David found himself slowing down the footage to normal speed, watching the way Rebecca bent down to tie Emma's shoe, the way Emma reached up to take her hand. They disappeared around the corner, heading towards school, and David was about to close the app when he saw Rebecca appear again on a different camera. The timestamp read 8:42. She was walking alone now, but she wasn't heading back toward the penthouse. She was walking in the direction of Emma's school. David frowned and switched to the camera that covered the street where Presidio Academy was located. The image quality was lower since it wasn't his camera, but part of the city's traffic monitoring system that he'd gained access to through his company's government contracts. At 8:55, he saw Rebecca walking slowly past the school. She paused in front of the building, then continued down the street. At 9:08, she walked past again, this time from the opposite direction. At 9:23, she appeared once more, walking even more slowly. David watched the footage 3 times, his confusion growing with each viewing. Why was Rebecca walking past Emma's school? She should have been back at the penthouse by 9 o'clock, starting on the list of tasks he'd left for her. Instead, she was circling Emma's school like some kind of surveillance operative, or like a stalker. The thought hit David like a physical blow. He had invited this woman into his home, given her access to his daughter, trusted her with the most precious thing in his life. What did he actually know about Rebecca Martinez? He had hired her through an agency after the briefest of interviews. based on her references and his desperate need for someone who could start immediately. He had done background checks, of course, but those only revealed criminal history, not intent. David's hands shook slightly as he scrolled through more footage. Rebecca walking past the school again at 9:37. Standing across the street at 9:54, partially hidden behind a parked car. Each image felt like a piece of evidence in a case he didn't want to prosecute. What if Rebecca wasn't the devoted employee she appeared to be? What if she was something much more dangerous? David had read stories about domestic employees who became obsessed with their employers' families, who developed unhealthy attachments to the children in their care. What if Rebecca's kindness toward Emma wasn't professional devotion, but something much more disturbing? David closed the app and stared out his office window at the bay. The water was grey today, choppy with whitecaps that reminded him of Emma's eyes when she was upset. He had built his entire life around protecting his daughter, around making sure she had everything she needed. The idea that he might have brought danger into their home, that his own desperation for help might have put Emma at risk, made him feel sick. He opened his laptop and began researching everything he could find about Rebecca Martinez. Her employment history, her previous addresses, her family background. He called the agency that had referred her and demanded to speak to someone who could verify every detail of her application. He even considered hiring a private investigator to dig deeper into her past. But even as David's paranoia spiraled, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him of the way Emma's face lit up when Rebecca walked into a room. The way his daughter had started eating breakfast again after months of picking at her food. The way Emma actually smiled now, something she hadn't done regularly since Sarah died. Rebecca had brought life back into their home in ways David couldn't deny. But now, watching her circle his daughter's school like a predator, he had to wonder what price that life might come with. David spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of controlled panic. He cancelled his remaining meetings and told Miranda to hold all calls. Instead, he sat in his office reviewing security footage from every day since Rebecca had started working for them, looking for patterns he might have missed. What he found didn't make him feel better. Rebecca had walked past Emma's school every single day for the past 3 weeks. Sometimes she made multiple passes. Sometimes she stood across the street for 10 or 15 minutes just watching. On 2 occasions, she had been there when school let out, positioned where she could see Emma leaving the building, even though she wasn't scheduled to pick her up those days. David called the school and spoke to Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, trying to keep his voice casual as he asked if there had been any unusual incidents lately. "Emma's been doing much better this semester," Mrs. Patterson said. "She seems happier, more engaged. I think having stable support at home has made a real difference. Has anyone unusual been around the school? Anyone who doesn't belong?" There was a pause. "Not that I'm aware of." "Is there something specific you're concerned about, Mr. Richardson?" David couldn't bring himself to explain that he was worried about his own employee. "Just being cautious. You know how it is." "Of course. We take security very seriously here. I'll make sure to mention your concerns to our safety coordinator, Adiko." After he hung up, David sat in his office watching the sun set over the bay. In 2 hours, he would go home to his penthouse, where Rebecca would have dinner waiting and Emma would want to tell him about her day. He would have to sit across from Rebecca at his dinner table, knowing what he now knew, pretending everything was normal while he figured out what to do next. The smart thing would be to fire her immediately, to err on the side of caution and find someone new, someone whose background he could investigate more thoroughly. But the thought of telling Emma that Rebecca was leaving, of watching his daughter's face fall as another person disappeared from her life, made David's chest tight. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Rebecca had a good reason for walking past the school every day. Maybe David's grief and paranoia were making him see threats where none existed. But as he gathered his things to go home, David couldn't shake the image of Rebecca standing across the street from Emma's school, hidden behind a parked car, watching the building with an intensity that felt anything but innocent. Tonight, he would have to look Rebecca in the eye and pretend he didn't know her secret. He would have to sit across from her and make small talk while wondering what other secrets she might be hiding. He would have to watch her interact with Emma and try to determine whether she was the devoted caregiver she appeared to be or something much more dangerous. The drive home had never felt longer. The penthouse felt different when David returned home that evening. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound more significant. The familiar click of his keycard in the lock, the soft hum of the climate control system, even the distant sound of Rebecca moving around in the kitchen, all of it felt charged with new meaning. David stood in his marble foyer for a moment, listening to the sounds of his home and trying to prepare himself for what was about to be the most difficult conversation of his life. The aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air, and David could hear Emma's laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a sound that had become precious to him over the past few months, a sign that his daughter was slowly finding her way back to happiness. Now the thought that Rebecca might be manipulating that happiness, using it for some unknown purpose, made his stomach turn. David set down his briefcase and walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps muffled by the expensive Persian rugs that Sarah had chosen years ago. As he rounded the corner, he saw Rebecca standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, while Emma sat at the counter, chattering animatedly about her day at school. And then Mrs. Patterson said my story about the magic treehouse was so good that she wants me to read it to the younger kids next week, Emma was saying, her face bright with excitement. She said I have a real talent for writing. That's wonderful, sweet pea, Rebecca replied, and David could hear the genuine pride in her voice. Your mom would be so proud of you. She always said you had her gift for storytelling. Emma beamed at the compliment, and David felt a familiar pang of guilt. He couldn't remember the last time he had asked Emma about her schoolwork, let alone praised her for it. Rebecca seemed to know details about Emma's life that David had completely missed. Daddy! Emma noticed him, standing in the doorway, and slipped down from her stool to run to him. Guess what happened at school today? David forced a smile and lifted Emma into a hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and trying to push away his suspicions for just a moment. Tell me everything, he said, carrying her back to the kitchen counter. Emma launched into an elaborate retelling of her day, complete with dramatic gestures and different voices for each of her classmates. David found himself actually listening, caught up in his daughter's enthusiasm in a way he hadn't been in months. Rebecca continued cooking, occasionally adding details or asking Emma questions that showed she had been paying careful attention to everything Emma had told her. Rebecca helped me practice reading my story out loud, Emma said, looking adoringly at the woman who had become such a central part of her life. She did all the different character voices with me, and she taught me how to make my voice louder so everyone can hear. That sounds very helpful, David said carefully, watching Rebecca's face for any sign of guilt or deception. But she just smiled warmly and began setting the table for dinner. Rebecca makes everything better, Emma continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. She taught me how to braid my hair like Mom used to, and she knows all the best stories, and she makes cookies that taste just like the ones from that bakery Mom liked. Each innocent revelation felt like another piece of evidence to David. Rebecca had inserted herself into every aspect of Emma's life, becoming indispensable in ways that went far beyond her job description. She had learned about Sarah, about Emma's routines, about their family traditions. The question was why. Dinner passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Rebecca had prepared David's favorite meal, herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables and wild rice. The conversation flowed easily, with Emma dominating the discussion as she described her upcoming school projects and her plans for the weekend. Rebecca listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. David sat quietly, studying Rebecca's every expression and gesture, looking for cracks in the facade. After dinner, Rebecca began clearing the dishes, while Emma went to her room to work on homework. David saw his opportunity and decided to test the waters. Rebecca, can we talk for a moment? She looked up from loading the dishwasher, and for just an instant, David thought he saw a flicker of something, fear maybe, cross her face. But it was gone so quickly, he might have imagined it. "Of course, Mr. Richardson, is everything all right?" David leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to appear casual. "I was reviewing some security footage today, and I noticed you walking past Emma's school several times this morning. Is everything okay?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Rebecca's hands stilled on the plate she was holding, and David watched her face carefully. She was definitely nervous now, but she was also thinking, calculating her response. "I wanted to make sure she got inside safely," Rebecca said finally. "Sometimes the other children can be rough during the morning rush, and Emma is smaller than most of her classmates." It was a reasonable explanation, the kind of thing a devoted caregiver might do. But David had seen the footage. Rebecca hadn't just been watching for Emma's safety. She had been there long after Emma was inside, and she had returned multiple times. "You walked past the school 4 times in one morning," David said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that made Rebecca stiffen. "And you've been doing it every day for weeks. That seems like more than just making sure she gets inside safely." Rebecca set down the plate and turned to face him fully. David could see her mind working, trying to decide how much truth to reveal. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "You're right. It is more than that." The admission hit David like a physical blow. He had been hoping, despite everything, that there would be an innocent explanation, that Rebecca would laugh and explain away his concerns with something simple and reasonable. Instead, she was confirming his worst fears. "What exactly is it, then?" David asked, his voice harder now. "Why are you watching my daughter's school?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on something beyond David's shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm terrified something will happen to her." "What do you mean?" "Mr. Richardson, do you know what happened at Emma's school 3 weeks ago?" David frowned. "What are you talking about?" "There was an incident. A man was seen on school grounds who didn't belong there. He was asking children questions about their families, trying to get them to come with him. The school sent a notice home, but I don't think you saw it." David felt a chill run down his spine. He received dozens of emails from Emma's school every week, most of which he delegated to Miranda to handle. It was entirely possible that he had missed something important. "The man matched the description of someone who was seen watching your building 2 weeks before that," Rebecca continued. "I saw him myself, standing across the street, taking pictures with his phone. I reported it to building security, but they said they couldn't do anything unless he actually tried to enter the property." David's paranoia shifted targets with dizzying speed. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" "I tried to. I left you 3 messages and sent 2 emails. You were in back-to-back meetings all week, and your assistant said you didn't want to be disturbed unless it was an emergency." David vaguely remembered Miranda mentioning something about messages from Rebecca, but he had assumed they were routine household matters. He made a mental note to check his email when this conversation was over. "So you decided to take matters into your own hands," David said. "I decided to make sure Emma was safe. Every morning I walk her to school, and then I make sure she actually gets inside the building. I watch for anyone who doesn't belong, anyone who might be watching her the way that man was watching your building. And every afternoon when school lets out, I'm there again, making sure she gets picked up safely." Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if she was finally able to defend herself after weeks of hiding her actions. "I know how it must look," she continued. "I know you probably think I'm some kind of stalker, or that I have inappropriate feelings about Emma, but Mr. Richardson, that little girl has been through enough trauma for one lifetime. I won't let anything else happen to her if I can prevent it." David stared at Rebecca, trying to process this new information. Everything she was saying made sense, but it also raised new questions. Why hadn't she been more direct about her concerns? Why all the secrecy? "Even if what you're saying is true," David said slowly, "why didn't you just explain this to me from the beginning? Why hide what you were doing?" Rebecca's composure finally cracked, and David saw raw emotion flash across her face, pain and frustration, and something that looked like grief. "Because you don't listen," she said, her voice rising. "Because every time I try to talk to you about Emma, about what she needs, about how she's feeling, you cut me off, or change the subject, or disappear into your office. Because you hired me to take care of every detail of your life, so you wouldn't have to deal with any of it yourself." The words hit David like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, but Rebecca wasn't finished. "Do you know that Emma cries herself to sleep sometimes? Do you know that she keeps a picture of her mother hidden under her pillow because she's afraid you'll get upset if you see her looking at it? Do you know that she tells people at school that her daddy is too busy to come to parent events because he has important work to do?" Each revelation was like a knife to David's chest. He had thought he was protecting Emma by maintaining his distance, by making sure she had everything she could possibly need. Instead, he was failing her in ways he hadn't even realized. "Do you know," Rebecca continued, tears streaming down her face now, "that 3 weeks ago Emma asked me if I was going to leave like her mommy did? She wanted to know if people only stay until they get tired of taking care of her." David felt like he couldn't breathe. The kitchen, with its granite countertops and professional appliances, felt like it was closing in around him. He thought about Emma's question that morning, asking if he could walk her to school. He thought about all the times she had tried to tell him about her day while he was checking his phone. He thought about the way she looked at Rebecca with such adoration, such desperate need for maternal attention. "I don't understand," David said weakly. "What does any of this have to do with watching her school?" Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. "Because, Mr. Richardson, I lost my daughter 5 years ago. She was Emma's age when she died, and I couldn't protect her. I failed her completely, and I swore to myself that I would never let another child get hurt if I had the power to prevent it." The confession hung between them like a bridge David wasn't sure he was ready to cross. Rebecca had lost a daughter. That explained so much about the way she interacted with Emma. The fierce protectiveness, the attention to every detail of Emma's emotional well-being. It also explained why she might see threats where none existed, why she might be overcompensating in ways that looked suspicious to an outside observer. "What happened to your daughter?" David asked gently. Rebecca closed her eyes, and David could see the pain that she had been carrying etched in every line of her face. "Her name was Sophia. She was walking home from school one day, just like she had 100 times before. A man approached her, told her that her mother had been in an accident and that he was there to take her to the hospital. Sophia was scared and confused, and she went with him. David felt sick. He could see where this story was going, and he didn't want to hear the rest of it. They found her body 3 days later," Rebecca continued, her voice completely flat now, as if emotion was too dangerous to allow. "The man had taken her to get money from her family. When we couldn't pay what he wanted, when the police got too close, he killed her and dumped her body in the bay." The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at Rebecca, this woman he had lived with for 6 months without really knowing at all. She had been carrying this devastating loss while taking care of his daughter, while bringing joy back into Emma's life. And he had been so wrapped up in his own grief that he had never bothered to ask about hers. "Rebecca," David said softly, "I'm so sorry." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was both grateful and heartbroken. "I see Sophia and Emma every day," she admitted. "The way she laughs, the way she asks a million questions, the way she trusts people even when she shouldn't. And I know that the world is full of people who would hurt her without thinking twice about it. So yes, I watch her school. I make sure she's safe every single day. Because I couldn't save my own daughter, but maybe I can save yours." David felt tears stinging his own eyes now. Everything he had thought he knew about Rebecca, about her motivations, about her relationship with Emma, had been completely wrong. She wasn't a threat to his daughter. She was the one person who understood exactly how precious Emma was, exactly how much there was to lose. "The man you saw watching the building," David said. "Do you really think he was a threat?" "I don't know. Maybe he was just a tourist taking pictures. Maybe he was a private investigator hired by one of your business competitors. Maybe he was planning something terrible. But I wasn't willing to take that chance. David nodded slowly. He understood now why Rebecca had been so secretive, why she had taken Emma's protection into her own hands rather than trust him to handle it. Because he had made it clear, through his actions if not his words, that he didn't want to be bothered with the details of Emma's daily life. "Why didn't you tell me about Sophia before?" David asked. Rebecca shrugged, suddenly looking very tired. When someone hires you to be their housekeeper, they don't usually want to know about your personal tragedies. You wanted someone efficient and professional who could take care of Emma and manage your household. You didn't want someone with emotional baggage who might bring her own problems into your perfect life. "That's not fair," David said, but even as he said it, he realized it was exactly fair. He had hired Rebecca to solve his problems, not to share her own. He had wanted someone who could take care of Emma without requiring any emotional investment from him. "You're right," he admitted. "That is exactly what I wanted. I wanted someone who could give Emma what I couldn't without asking anything from me in return." Rebecca nodded, and I was fine with that arrangement. More than fine. Taking care of Emma gave me a purpose I hadn't had since Sophia died. It made me feel useful again. But then I started to see how much Emma needed more than just practical care. She needed a father who could see her, really see her. And I realized that I was enabling you to avoid dealing with your own grief by managing all the details of Emma's life for you. David leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling like his legs might give out. Everything Rebecca was saying was true, but hearing it laid out so starkly was devastating. He had thought he was providing for Emma, protecting her by giving her the best of everything. Instead, he had been abandoning her to his own fear of getting too close, of risking the kind of loss he had experienced when Sarah died. "So what do I do now?" David asked. "How do I fix this?" Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, as if she was deciding whether he was really ready to hear the answer. "You start showing up," she said simply. "You start being present for the life you created, instead of just funding it. You stop hiding behind work and start dealing with the fact that you're not just Emma's provider, you're her father. And fathers don't get to outsource the emotional parts of parenting because they're too scared to feel something." The words stung because they were so accurate. David had been hiding behind his work, using his success as an excuse to avoid the messy, unpredictable world of being a single parent. He had convinced himself that providing for Emma financially was enough, that making sure she had the best schools and clothes and opportunities was the same as being a good father. "I don't know how," David admitted. "I don't know how to be what she needs." "You start small," Rebecca said. "You ask her about her day and actually listen to the answer. You show up to school events. You make time for her that isn't scheduled around your business meetings. You let her see that you're sad sometimes too, that it's okay to miss her mother and still be happy about other things." David thought about Emma's question that morning, asking if he could walk her to school. Such a simple request, and he had dismissed it without a second thought. "What about you?" David asked. "What do you need from me?" Rebecca looked surprised by the question, as if no employer had ever asked her that before. "I need you to trust me," she said. "I need you to know that everything I do is because I love Emma, like she was my own daughter. I need you to understand that when I'm overprotective or when I see threats that might not be there, it's because I can't bear the thought of losing another child. And I need you to start being Emma's father again," she continued, "so that I can go back to being her caregiver instead of trying to be both." David nodded, understanding for the first time the impossible position he had put Rebecca in. He had asked her to fill a role that was far bigger than housekeeper or nanny. He had asked her to be Emma's emotional anchor while he retreated into his work, and then he had become suspicious when she took that responsibility seriously. "There's something else," Rebecca said hesitantly. "Something I haven't told you." David braced himself for another revelation. "The school called me yesterday. Emma's teacher wants to schedule a conference with you." Emma has been telling her classmates that her daddy is too busy to come to school, and Mrs. Patterson is concerned. She wants to discuss Emma's emotional state and some behavioral changes she's noticed. David felt another wave of guilt wash over him. What kind of behavioral changes? Emma has been very clingy with the female teachers. She asks them personal questions about their families, about whether they have children, and she's been having trouble focusing during lessons. Mrs. Patterson thinks she might benefit from talking to the school counselor. The thought of Emma needing counseling because of his neglect made David feel physically ill. His daughter was struggling emotionally, and he had been completely oblivious to it. "When is the conference?" David asked. "Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I told them you would need to check your schedule." David pulled out his phone and called Miranda's direct line. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Richardson, is everything all right?" "Miranda, I need you to clear my schedule tomorrow afternoon from 2:30 until 5. Cancel whatever meetings you need to cancel. Reschedule whatever you can. This is a priority." "Of course, sir. May I ask what for?" "I have a school conference with Emma's teacher. And Miranda, from now on, anything related to Emma's school takes priority over business meetings. No exceptions." "Understood, sir. I'll update your calendar preferences accordingly." David hung up and looked at Rebecca, who was watching him with something that looked like hope. "I'm going to that conference," David said, "and I want you to come with me. You know more about what Emma needs than I do, and I need to understand what I've been missing." Rebecca nodded. "I think that's a good idea." They stood in the kitchen looking at each other. The air between them cleared of suspicion, but heavy with the weight of everything that had been revealed. David realized that he had completely misjudged Rebecca, had seen her devotion to Emma as something sinister, instead of recognizing it for what it was, the desperate love of a woman who had lost her own child and was determined not to lose another. "Rebecca," David said, "I owe you an apology. More than one, actually." "Mr. Richardson." "David," he corrected. "After everything you've just told me, I think we can drop the formal titles." Rebecca smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "David, then, you don't owe me anything. I should have been more upfront about my concerns from the beginning. You shouldn't have had to be. I should have been paying enough attention to notice when something was wrong. I should have been the one watching out for Emma instead of leaving it all to you." Emma's voice carried down from upstairs, calling for Rebecca to help her with her math homework. Rebecca started to move toward the stairs, but David stopped her. "Let me," he said. "I think it's time I started helping with homework." Rebecca looked surprised but pleased. "She's working on multiplication tables. She's been struggling with the 8s. David nodded and headed toward the stairs, then paused and turned back. "Rebecca, thank you. For taking care of Emma when I couldn't. For protecting her when I didn't even realize she needed protecting. And for telling me the truth tonight, even when it was hard." "Thank you for listening," Rebecca replied. "And for trusting me with Emma, even after everything." David climbed the stairs toward Emma's room, feeling nervous in a way he hadn't felt since Emma was born. He had been avoiding this kind of intimate parenting for 2 years, and he wasn't sure he remembered how to do it. But Rebecca was right. It was time to start showing up, time to start being the father Emma needed instead of just the provider she had. Emma was sitting at her desk, pencil in hand, staring at a worksheet full of multiplication problems. She looked up when David appeared in her doorway, her face brightening with surprise and delight. "Daddy, did you come to help with my homework?" "If you want me to," David said, pulling up a chair beside her desk. "Rebecca told me you've been working hard on multiplication." "The 8s are really hard," Emma said, leaning against his arm in a way that made David's chest tight with emotion. "But I almost have them figured out." David looked at the worksheet, covered with Emma's careful handwriting. She had gotten most of the problems right, but he could see where she was struggling with the larger numbers. "Can you show me how you're solving them?" David asked. Emma launched into an explanation of her method, her face serious with concentration. David found himself genuinely interested in the way her mind worked, impressed by her logical approach to the problems. As they worked together, Emma chattering about her strategies and asking questions about why multiplication worked the way it did. David realized how much he had missed by delegating these small daily interactions to Rebecca. This was what Rebecca had been trying to tell him. Emma didn't just need someone to make sure her homework got done. She needed someone to be interested in how she thought, to celebrate her small victories, to help her work through her frustrations. She needed a parent who was present for the ordinary moments, not just the major milestones. They worked on math for an hour, and then Emma asked if David wanted to see the story she was writing for Mrs. Patterson's class. David found himself drawn into Emma's imaginative tale about a girl who could talk to animals. Impressed by her creativity and the sophisticated vocabulary she was using. When had Emma become such a good writer? When had she developed this confident storytelling voice? As Emma read her story aloud, complete with different voices for each animal character, David realized that Rebecca had been nurturing talents in Emma that he hadn't even known existed. While he had been focused on providing Emma with the best educational opportunities money could buy, Rebecca had been paying attention to Emma's actual interests and abilities. "This is a wonderful story," David said when Emma finished reading. "Mrs. Patterson was right. You do have a real gift for writing." Emma beamed. "Rebecca helped me think of some of the ideas. She tells the best stories. Did you know she used to read stories to kids at the library?" David filed away this new piece of information about Rebecca's background. There was so much about the woman who had been living in his home that he had never bothered to learn. "Maybe we could write a story together sometime," David suggested, surprised by his own offer. Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? You would want to do that?" "I would love to do that." Emma threw her arms around David's neck and hugged him fiercely. "I missed you, Daddy," she whispered into his shoulder. The simple words broke David's heart. Emma had been right there all along, waiting for him to notice her, to engage with her, to be her father instead of just her guardian. And he had been so lost in his own grief and fear that he had almost missed her childhood entirely. "I missed you too, sweetheart," David whispered back. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to remember how to be your daddy." When Emma finally pulled back from the hug, her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "Are you going to help me with homework again tomorrow?" "To every day," David promised. "If you want me to." "I want you to." David tucked Emma into bed that night, something he hadn't done in months. As he turned off her light and headed for the door, Emma called out to him. "Daddy, are you going to fire Rebecca?" The question stopped David in his tracks. "Why would you think that?" "Because you and Rebecca were talking very seriously in the kitchen, and she looked like she was crying. And Mrs. Chen at school said that when her parents talked seriously like that, it meant someone was going to lose their job." David walked back to Emma's bed and sat down on the edge. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going to fire Rebecca. We were just talking about how to take better care of you. Rebecca loves you very much, and she's going to stay with us for as long as she wants to." Emma relaxed visibly. "Good, I don't want Rebecca to leave. She makes me feel safe." "What do you mean?" When Rebecca is here, I don't worry as much about bad things happening. She pays attention to everything, and she makes sure I'm okay. Like when that scary man was at school, Rebecca made sure he couldn't get near me." David's blood ran cold. "What scary man at school?" "The one who was asking kids questions about their families. Rebecca told me never to talk to him if I saw him again, and she made sure he wasn't around when she picked me up from school. She said some grown-ups aren't safe, but that she would always keep me protected." David realized that Emma had known about the threat all along, that Rebecca had been protecting her while also preparing her without causing unnecessary fear. It was exactly what a good parent would do, and David felt another wave of gratitude toward the woman who had been safeguarding his daughter while he remained oblivious to the danger. "Rebecca is very good at keeping you safe," David agreed. "And so am I. We both want to make sure nothing bad ever happens to you. Will you start paying attention like Rebecca does?" The question was asked with the directness that only children can manage, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Yes," David said. "I promise I'll start paying attention." Emma smiled and settled back into her pillows. Good, I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma, more than anything in the world. David left Emma's room with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow, he would go to that school conference and face the full extent of his failures as a father. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, he felt like he might actually be capable of becoming the parent Emma deserved. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, finishing the last of the dinner dishes. She looked up when he entered, her face carefully neutral. "How did homework go?" "Better than I expected," David admitted. "Emma is incredibly smart. I don't think I realized how much she's grown intellectually in the past few months. She's been working very hard. She wants to make you proud." The words hit David with their simple truth. Emma had been achieving and growing and becoming this amazing little person, all while hoping that her father would notice and approve. And he had been too wrapped up in his own world to see any of it. "Rebecca, I want you to know that what you told me tonight, about Sophia, about everything you've been doing to protect Em, it doesn't change anything about your job here. If anything, it makes me realize how incredibly lucky we are to have you." Rebecca's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I was worried you might think I was too emotionally involved." "You are emotionally involved. That's what makes you so good at taking care of Emma. She needs someone who loves her like family, and that's exactly what you've given her." Rebecca smiled, the first genuinely happy expression David had seen from her all evening. "There is one thing I need to ask you," David continued. "The man you saw watching the building, the one at Emma's school, do you think he's still a threat?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I haven't seen him in over a week. It's possible he moved on to other targets, or that he was never a real threat to begin with. But I think we should stay vigilant." David nodded. "I'm going to have my security team do a full threat assessment, and I want you to feel comfortable coming to me directly with any concerns, no matter how small they might seem." "I will." "And Rebecca, I want to know more about you. About Sophia, about your life before you came to work for us. If you're going to be part of Emma's life, part of our family, then I should know who you really are." Rebecca looked surprised by the invitation to share more of herself, but David could see that she was pleased by it too. "I'd like that," she said softly. As David headed upstairs to his own room, he reflected on how much had changed in the course of one evening. This morning, he had been suspicious of Rebecca, worried that she might be a threat to his daughter. Tonight, he understood that she was the best thing that had happened to their family since Sarah died. She had been protecting Emma not just physically but emotionally, filling gaps that David hadn't even realized existed. Tomorrow would bring the school conference, and David suspected he was going to learn some difficult truths about how his absence had affected Emma. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, he felt hopeful about the future. He had been given a second chance to be the father Emma needed, and he wasn't going to waste it. The penthouse felt different as David prepared for bed. The silence that had once felt peaceful now seemed full of possibility. Tomorrow, he would start the work of rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. And Rebecca, the woman he had almost lost through his own paranoia and neglect, would be there to help him navigate the complicated terrain of single parenthood. As David fell asleep that night, he thought about Emma's story, the one about the girl who could talk to animals. In the story, the girl had lost her way in a dark forest, but the animals had helped her find her path home. David realized that Rebecca had been like one of those helpful creatures, guiding him back toward what mattered most when he had lost his way in the darkness of his own grief. The journey back to being a real father would not be easy, but David was finally ready to begin. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Presidio Academy as David Richardson walked through the front doors for the first time in over a year. The last time he had been inside Emma's school was during the enrollment process, when he had written a substantial check and delegated all future school interactions to his assistant. Now walking down the hallway, lined with colorful student artwork and motivational posters, David felt like a tourist in his own daughter's world. Rebecca walked beside him, her presence both comforting and humbling. She knew these hallways, knew which classroom was Emma's, knew the names of Emma's teachers and classmates. David realized that Rebecca had been attending school events and parent meetings that he had never even known were happening. While he had been building his business empire, Rebecca had been building relationships in Emma's educational community. Mrs. Patterson's classroom was bright and welcoming, with student desks arranged in small groups and walls covered with creative writing assignments and math projects. David scanned the displays, looking for Emma's work, and felt a surge of pride when he spotted her name on several pieces. Emma's writing assignment about her family traditions was posted prominently near the teacher's desk, and David felt a pang of guilt as he read her description of making cookies with Rebecca as their new Sunday tradition. Mrs. Patterson was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades working with children. She greeted David warmly, but he could sense an underlying concern in her manner. "Mr. Richardson, thank you so much for coming. And Rebecca, I'm glad you could join us as well. I know how important you are to Emma." They settled into child-sized chairs around a small table, and David felt enormous and out of place. Mrs. Patterson opened a folder filled with Emma's work and assessments. "I want to start by saying that Emma is a bright, creative child with tremendous potential. Her academic work is excellent, and she has a natural gift for storytelling that really sets her apart from her peers." David felt a moment of parental pride, but Mrs. Patterson's expression remained serious. "However, I have some concerns about Emma's emotional well-being that I felt we needed to discuss." Mrs. Patterson pulled out several drawings that Emma had done during art time. At first glance, they looked like typical childhood artwork, but as David looked more closely, he began to see troubling patterns. In picture after picture, Emma had drawn families, but the father figures were always absent or turned away. In one drawing, a little girl stood alone in a big house, while a man in a suit worked at a computer in a separate room. "Emma has been expressing some anxiety about abandonment," Mrs. Patterson explained gently. "She frequently asks me and other teachers questions about whether we're going to leave the school, whether our own children still need us now that they're grown up. She seems to have a fear that the adults in her life will disappear." David stared at the drawings, seeing his failures reflected in his daughter's artwork. The little girl in the pictures was clearly Emma, and the distant father figure was undeniably him. "She's also been having some difficulty with peer relationships," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Emma tends to cling to adult figures, rather than engaging with children her own age. During recess, she often stays near the teachers, instead of playing with her classmates." Rebecca spoke up for the first time. "At home, Emma talks constantly about wanting to help with adult tasks. She wants to cook dinner, clean the house, organize David's office. I think she's trying to make herself indispensable so that people won't leave her." The observation hit David like a physical blow. Emma was 8 years old and already worried about being abandoned, already trying to earn love through usefulness. It was a heartbreaking echo of how Rebecca herself had tried to become indispensable to their family. "I'd like to recommend that Emma speak with our school counselor," Mrs. Patterson said. "Ms. Rodriguez specializes in helping children process grief and family transitions. I think Emma could benefit from having a safe space to express her feelings about losing her mother and adjusting to her new family structure." David nodded, though the thought of his daughter needing therapy because of his emotional neglect made him feel sick with guilt. "There's something else," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice even gentler now. "Emma has been telling her classmates that her father is too important to come to school events. She seems proud of your success, but also resigned to the idea that your work will always be more important than she is." The words felt like a knife to David's heart. He thought about all the school events he had missed, all the parent-teacher conferences he had skipped, all the times Emma had asked him to come to something and he had sent Rebecca in his place. "What can I do to fix this?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The good news is that children are remarkably resilient," Mrs. Patterson said. Emma is young enough that consistent changes in your family dynamic can make a real difference. She needs to see that she's a priority in your life, not just financially, but emotionally. Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a school calendar. There are several upcoming events where parent participation is encouraged. The Fall Festival next week, the Halloween Parade, the Thanksgiving Feast, where families are invited to eat lunch with their children. David looked at the calendar, mentally calculating which meetings he would need to reschedule or cancel. Then he stopped himself. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten him into this situation in the first place. "I'll be at all of them," David said firmly. "Whatever I need to move at work, I'll move." Mrs. Patterson smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "I think that will mean the world to Emma. She talks about you constantly, Mr. Richardson. She's very proud of you, and she wants desperately to share her school life with you." After they scheduled Emma's first appointment with the school counselor and discussed strategies for helping Emma build friendships with her peers, David and Rebecca walked back to his car in contemplative silence. David felt emotionally drained, as if he had been forced to confront every parenting mistake he had made in the past 2 years. "That was harder than I expected," David admitted, as they sat in his Tesla. "But necessary," Rebecca replied. "Emma is going to be okay, David. She's strong, and she has a lot of love in her life. She just needs to feel secure in that love." David started the car, but didn't immediately begin driving. "Rebecca, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay? If you were in my position, if Emma was your daughter, what would you do differently?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "I would start having regular one-on-one time with her, not scheduled around work, not interrupted by phone calls, time that belongs just to Emma. I would ask her about her feelings, about what she misses about her mother, about what she hopes for in the future." David nodded, taking mental notes. "I would also create new family traditions that are just yours and Emma's, things that can't be delegated to someone else, experiences that only the two of you share. Emma needs to feel like she has a special relationship with you that's separate from everything else in your life." "What kind of traditions?" "Maybe you could take her out for breakfast every Saturday morning, just the two of you. Or you could have a weekly movie night where she gets to pick the film. Maybe you could start a garden together, or take a cooking class, or learn a new hobby that you both enjoy." David found himself getting excited about these possibilities. When was the last time he had learned something new just for the joy of it? When was the last time he had spent time with Emma without any agenda other than enjoying her company? "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "Emma needs to see you being vulnerable sometimes. She needs to know that it's okay to be sad about her mother, that grief doesn't mean you love her any less. Right now, she's trying to protect your feelings by hiding her own sadness, and that's too much emotional responsibility for a child." David thought about the conversation he had avoided having with Emma about Sarah's death, about how he had tried to shield her from his own grief by pretending it didn't exist. He had thought he was being strong for Emma, but instead he had been teaching her that feelings were dangerous things that needed to be hidden. "I don't know how to talk to her about Sarah," David admitted. "Every time I try, I just fall apart." "Maybe falling apart in front of Emma isn't the worst thing that could happen," Rebecca said gently. "Maybe it would show her that it's okay to feel sad, that grief is a normal part of loving someone you've lost." David started driving toward home, but instead of taking the direct route, he found himself driving toward the Golden Gate Bridge. He pulled into a parking area overlooking the bay and turned off the car. "Rebecca, can I ask you about Sophia? About how you've learned to live with losing her?" Rebecca's hands tightened in her lap, but she nodded. "The first year was the worst. I couldn't function, couldn't work, couldn't imagine ever feeling normal again. I blamed myself for everything. For letting her walk home alone, for not teaching her to be more suspicious of strangers, for not being there when she needed me most." David could hear the pain in Rebecca's voice, even 5 years later. "What changed?" "I started volunteering at a children's hospital. At first, it was just because I needed something to do with my hands, some way to feel useful. But being around sick children and their families made me realize that love doesn't end when someone dies. The love I had for Sophia was still there, still real, still powerful. I just needed to find a way to honor it. Rebecca looked out at the water, where boats were moving slowly across the bay. Working with children who were fighting for their lives made me understand that every day we have with the people we love is a gift. I couldn't save Sophia, but I could use the love I had for her to help other children. When I started working for your family, taking care of Emma became a way of keeping Sophia's memory alive. David felt tears in his eyes as he listened to Rebecca's story. She had transformed her grief into something powerful and healing, while he had let his grief consume him and damage his relationship with Emma. "Do you think Emma knows how much I love her?" David asked. "I think she knows you love her," Rebecca said carefully. "But I don't think she feels like she's the most important thing in your life. And for a child who has already lost one parent, feeling like she might lose the other emotionally is terrifying." David sat with that truth for a moment, watching the waves crash against the shore below them. He thought about Emma's drawings, about her fear of abandonment, about the way she had tried to make herself useful to earn love. "I want to tell you something," David said suddenly, "about the night Sarah died." Rebecca turned to look at him, sensing the importance of what he was about to share. "We had a fight that night. Nothing serious, just the kind of stupid argument that married couples have. Sarah wanted me to take a vacation, to spend more time with Emma, to work less. I told her that I was building something important, that the business needed me, that I was doing it all for our family." David's voice cracked as he continued. "The last thing I said to her was that she didn't understand the pressure I was under, that it was easy for her to ask me to work less when she didn't have the responsibility of providing for our family. She left to go pick up dinner and I stayed home with Emma, still angry about the fight." Rebecca waited patiently for him to continue. "When the police called to tell me about the accident, the first thing I thought was that our fight was the last conversation we would ever have. The last thing Sarah heard from me was criticism and resentment. And I realized that I had been taking her for granted, taking our family for granted, assuming that there would always be time later to focus on what really mattered." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "After the funeral, I threw myself into work even harder because I couldn't bear to slow down long enough to feel the guilt. But I was doing the exact same thing to Emma that I had done to Sarah. I was assuming there would always be time later to be the father she needed, always time later to show her how much she meant to me." Rebecca reached over and took David's hand. "David, you can't change what happened with Sarah, but you can change what happens with Emma. It's not too late." David squeezed Rebecca's hand, grateful for her steady presence in the chaos of his emotions. "I want to start over," David said. "With Emma, with everything. I want to be the kind of father who shows up, who pays attention, who makes time for what matters." "Then that's what you'll do," Rebecca said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boats move across the bay. David felt something shifting inside him, a loosening of the tight control he had maintained over his emotions for the past 2 years. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt ready to step back into the messy, unpredictable world of being a real parent. "Rebecca," David said as they prepared to drive home, "I want to ask you something else." "What is it?" "I want you to know that you're not just Emma's caregiver anymore. You're part of our family, and I want to start treating you like family instead of like an employee." Rebecca looked surprised by the declaration. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I want to know about your life, your interests, your dreams. It means I want Emma to understand that you're not just someone we pay to take care of her, but someone who chooses to love her. And it means that I want you to feel comfortable expressing your opinions about Emma's needs, even when those opinions challenge me." Rebecca smiled, and David could see that his words meant a lot to her. "I would like that very much," she said. When they arrived home, Emma was already back from school, sitting at the kitchen counter with an after-school snack that the housekeeper had prepared. Her face lit up when she saw David and Rebecca walk in together. Daddy, how was my teacher conference? Did Mrs. Patterson tell you about my story? David sat down beside Emma and pulled her into a hug. She told me you're an amazing writer and a very special little girl. And she told me some other things that made me realize I need to be a better daddy. Emma looked up at him with those serious gray eyes. What kind of things? David took a deep breath, remembering Rebecca's advice about being vulnerable with Emma. She told me that you sometimes worry about whether the people you love are going to leave you. And she told me that you think my work is more important to me than you are. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Isn't it? The question broke David's heart. No, sweetheart. Nothing is more important to me than you are. But I haven't been showing you that, and I'm very sorry. Are you going to start showing me? Every single day, David promised. Starting right now. What would you like to do together? Emma's face brightened immediately. Can we make cookies? The kind that Mom used to make? David looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. I don't know how to make cookies, David admitted. But maybe Rebecca could teach us both. Emma clapped her hands together. Yes, we can all make cookies together. For the next 2 hours, the three of them worked in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs and stirring chocolate chips into the batter. David found himself laughing more than he had in months as Emma carefully explained the proper technique for dropping cookie dough onto baking sheets. Rebecca guided them through the process with patience and humor, and David realized that this was what a family was supposed to feel like. Warm, chaotic, full of laughter and love. As they waited for the first batch of cookies to bake, Emma curled up against David on the living room couch, chattering about her day at school. David listened to every word, asking questions and making comments that showed he was truly engaged. He noticed things he had missed before. The way Emma's face animated when she talked about her favorite books. The way she instinctively reached for his hand when she was excited about something. The way she looked at him with such hopeful adoration. Daddy, Emma said as the timer went off for the cookies, are you going to come to my school festival next week? I wouldn't miss it, David replied, and he meant it. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed with a stomach full of fresh chocolate chip cookies and a heart full of attention from her father, David and Rebecca sat in the living room, talking about plans for the coming weeks. David had already called his assistant to clear his schedule for the school festival, the Halloween parade, and the Thanksgiving feast. He had also asked Miranda to block out 2 hours every weekday evening for family time, with strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed unless there was a genuine emergency. There's something I want to discuss with you, David said, as Rebecca prepared to go to her room for the night. What is it? Your living situation. You've been staying in the housekeeper's quarters, but I think it's time we acknowledge that you're more than just an employee. I'd like to offer you the guest suite on the 2nd floor. It's larger, more comfortable, and it would put you closer to Emma if she needs anything during the night. Rebecca looked touched by the offer. Are you sure? I don't want to overstep boundaries. Rebecca, you've been more of a parent to Emma in the past 6 months than I have in the past 2 years. You're not overstepping boundaries. You're family. As Rebecca moved her belongings to the guest suite the next day, David realized how much their living situation had changed. What had started as a simple employer-employee relationship had evolved into something much more complex and meaningful. Rebecca wasn't just helping to raise Emma. She was helping David learn how to be a father again. The school festival the following week was a revelation for David. He had expected to feel out of place among the other parents, awkward and inexperienced in the world of elementary school social events. Instead, he found himself genuinely enjoying the experience of seeing Emma in her school environment, meeting her teachers and classmates, participating in the silly games and activities that made up a typical school festival. Emma was radiant with pride as she introduced David to her friends, showing him around the various booths and activities. David found himself genuinely interested in the art projects on display, the science experiments the children had conducted, the creative writing assignments posted on classroom walls. This was Emma's world, and for the first time, David felt like he belonged in it. Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Patterson approached them as they were leaving the festival. I'm so glad you could make it. Emma has been talking about your visit all week. I'm glad I came, David replied honestly. I had no idea how much I was missing. Emma seems much happier lately, Mrs. Patterson observed. More confident, more settled. Whatever changes you've made at home are definitely having a positive impact. As they walked to the car, Emma slipped her hand into David's and looked up at him with a smile that could have powered the entire city. Daddy, this was the best school festival ever. Why is that, sweetheart? Because you were there. Because you saw my classroom and met my friends and watched me win the ring toss game. Because you were proud of me. David stopped walking and knelt down to Emma's level, right there in the school parking lot. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm always proud of you. Every single day. Even when I'm not there to see the amazing things you do. Even when I'm busy with work. Even when I forget to tell you. You are the most important thing in my life. And I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Emma threw her arms around David's neck and hugged him tightly. I love you too, Daddy, all the way to the moon and back. But as they drove home, with Emma chattering excitedly about the festival and Rebecca smiling quietly in the passenger seat, David felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. His family looked different now than it had before, but it was still a family. It was still built on love and commitment, and the choice to show up for each other every day. That night, as David tucked Emma into bed, she asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. Daddy, do you think Mommy would be proud of us? David sat down on the edge of Emma's bed, feeling the weight of the question. He thought about Sarah, about the fight they'd had the night she died, about all the ways he had failed to honor her memory in the years since her death. I think, David said carefully, that Mommy would be proud of how brave and smart and kind you've become. And I think she would be happy that we found Rebecca to help take care of our family. But I also think Mommy would want me to tell you that it's okay to be sad sometimes, that missing her doesn't mean we can't be happy about other things. Emma nodded solemnly. Rebecca told me that loving someone who died doesn't hurt them, it helps them. She said that when we remember happy things about people we love, it keeps them alive in our hearts. David felt a surge of gratitude toward Rebecca for helping Emma understand grief in a way that he hadn't been able to do himself. Rebecca's very wise, David said, and she's right. Every time you tell a story or write something creative or show kindness to someone who needs it, you're honoring Mommy's memory. Because those are all things that Mommy loved about life. Emma smiled sleepily. I'm going to write a story about Mommy for my next school assignment. About how she used to read to me and make cookies and sing silly songs in the car. I think that's a beautiful idea. And maybe you could share some of those memories with me too. I'd love to hear your favorite stories about Mommy. Really? You won't be too sad. I might be a little sad, David admitted. But I'll also be happy, because talking about Mommy with you is one of my favorite things to do. As Emma drifted off to sleep, David realized that he had finally learned how to honor Sarah's memory in the way she would have wanted, by being present for their daughter, by creating the kind of warm, loving home that Sarah had always dreamed of, by showing Emma that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes shape. 6 months later, David stood in the kitchen of their new house in Marin County, watching Rebecca and Emma work together to prepare Thanksgiving dinner. They had moved out of the penthouse in the spring, choosing a home with a yard where Emma could play and a kitchen designed for family meals rather than catered events. The house was smaller than the penthouse, but infinitely warmer, filled with the sounds of daily life and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Emma had blossomed in ways that amazed David every day. She was confident and outgoing, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued. Her sessions with the school counselor had helped her process her grief about losing Sarah, and she now talked openly about missing her mother while also embracing the love and stability that David and Rebecca provided. David had kept his promise to prioritize Emma above work, And while his business was still successful, he no longer defined himself solely by his professional achievements. He'd learned to find meaning in the small moments, helping Emma with homework, reading bedtime stories, attending school events, taking weekend trips to explore California's beaches and mountains. Rebecca had become far more than an employee or even a friend. She was family in every sense that mattered, a partner in raising Emma and a source of wisdom and stability for all of them. David had legally formalized her role as Emma's guardian, ensuring that if anything ever happened to him, Emma would remain with the woman who loved her like a daughter. "Daddy, come help us with the stuffing," Emma called from across the kitchen. "Rebecca is teaching me Grandma Sophia's secret recipe." David smiled as he joined them, rolling up his sleeves to help with the meal preparation. Rebecca had begun sharing stories about Sophia with Emma, and Emma had embraced the memory of the little girl she had never met as an honorary big sister. It was a beautiful way of keeping Sophia's memory alive, while also helping Emma understand the depth of Rebecca's love for her. As they worked together in the kitchen, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a man consumed by work and paralyzed by grief, barely present in his daughter's life. He had been suspicious of the very woman who was saving his family, too lost in his own pain to recognize the gift he had been given. Now watching Emma laugh as she tried to stuff the turkey under Rebecca's patient guidance, David understood that families come in many forms. Love isn't always biological, and sometimes the people who matter most are the ones who choose to stay when they don't have to. Rebecca had chosen to love Emma like her own daughter, and in doing so, she had given David the chance to become the father he was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked, noticing David's contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," David replied. "For you, for Emma, for second chances." Emma looked up from the turkey, her hands covered in stuffing and her face bright with happiness. "I'm grateful too, for our family, exactly the way it is." David pulled both Emma and Rebecca into a hug, not caring about the flour and herbs that transferred to his clothes. This was what he had been missing during all those years of chasing success and avoiding emotion, the messy, beautiful, imperfect reality of love in action. Later that evening, after their Thanksgiving feast, and after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie marathon, David and Rebecca sat on the porch overlooking their garden, talking quietly about their plans for the future. "I have something I want to ask you," David said, his voice nervous in a way that Rebecca hadn't heard since the night he had confronted her about following Emma to school. "What is it?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Rebecca's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I know this might seem complicated, given how we started," David said. "But Rebecca, over the past year, you've become so much more than Emma's caregiver or even my friend. You've become my partner in every way that matters. You've made me a better father and a better man. You've brought joy and warmth and love back into our lives when I thought we might never find those things again." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as David continued, "I love you, Rebecca, not just because of what you've done for Emma, but because of who you are. Because of your strength and your compassion and your ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it in themselves. I want to build a future with you, to make our family official in every way possible." David got down on one knee, right there on their front porch, with the garden Emma had helped them plant stretching out before them. "Rebecca Martinez, will you marry me?" Rebecca was crying now, tears of joy streaming down her face as she looked at the man who had become so much more than just her employer. David had grown into the father Emma deserved and the partner Rebecca had never dared to hope for. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course I'll marry you." As David slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Two broken people who had found healing in each other, who had learned that love doesn't always follow traditional paths. Sometimes it grows slowly, carefully, out of shared commitment to something bigger than yourself. "Emma is going to be so excited," Rebecca said, as they sat together on the porch swing, admiring the ring that caught the light from the kitchen window. "She's been asking me when I was going to propose for months," David admitted with a laugh. "She's actually been giving me advice about how to do it romantically enough to make you say yes." Rebecca laughed through her tears. "That little girl has been trying to matchmake us since the day we met." "Smart kid. She knew what we needed before we did." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their front porch, watching the stars appear in the California sky, David marveled at the unexpected paths that life could take. A year ago, he had thought he was hiring a housekeeper. Instead, he had found a wife, a co-parent, and a second chance at the kind of family he had thought was lost forever. Emma stirred on the couch inside, and both David and Rebecca automatically moved to check on her. It was an instinct they shared now, this constant awareness of Emma's needs and well-being. They tucked a blanket around their sleeping daughter and stood together for a moment, watching her peaceful face in the soft light from the television. "She looks so much like Sarah when she sleeps," David whispered. "But she has your stubborn chin," Rebecca replied with a smile. "And your kind heart," David added. As they prepared for bed that night, David reflected on the strange and wonderful way that grief had brought them all together. Rebecca's loss of Sophia had led her to their family. David's inability to cope with losing Sarah had created the need for Rebecca's presence in their lives. And Emma's resilience in the face of losing her mother had shown them all what it meant to choose love, even when love came with the risk of loss. None of them would have chosen the path that led them to this moment, but all of them were grateful for the family they had built from the ashes of their individual sorrows. They had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting the people you've lost. It means honoring their memory by choosing to love again, by building something beautiful from the broken pieces of your heart. As David fell asleep that night, with Rebecca's hand in his and Emma's soft breathing audible from her room down the hall, he thought about the security footage that had started this whole journey. He had been so worried about threats from outside their home that he had almost missed the greatest gift right inside it. Rebecca hadn't been stalking his daughter. She had been protecting her, loving her, preparing to sacrifice anything to keep her safe. Sometimes the very thing that saves you looks dangerous from the outside. Sometimes the person who loves you most is the one you trust least. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to see clearly, to choose love over fear, to build a family that's even stronger for having been broken once before. David Richardson had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in stock prices or profit margins. They could only be measured in moments like this: a sleeping child, a woman who had chosen to love them both, and a future full of ordinary miracles waiting to unfold. 3 years later, David stood in the kitchen of their Marin County home, watching Rebecca pack Emma's lunch for her first day of middle school. The morning routine had become sacred to their family. No phones, no work calls, just the three of them starting each day together. Emma bounded down the stairs in her new school uniform, her auburn hair braided with the same care Rebecca had shown since that first day at Presidio Academy. At 11, Emma had grown into a confident, articulate young girl who spoke openly about her feelings and dreams. "I'm nervous about the big school," Emma admitted, adjusting her backpack straps. "What if I get lost in the hallways?" Rebecca knelt down to Emma's level, the same gesture she had made countless times over the years. "Remember what we practiced. Deep breath, shoulders back, and if you need help, find a teacher or counselor. You're braver than you know, sweet pea." David smiled at the nickname that had stuck all these years. Rebecca had never stopped calling Emma Sweet Pea, and Emma had never stopped lighting up when she heard it. "Your mom's right," David said, wrapping Emma in a hug. "And remember, I'll be at pickup today. We're going to celebrate surviving your first day with ice cream." Emma grinned. "Promise?" "Promise." As they walked to the car, Emma between David and Rebecca, David reflected on how naturally the word mom had come to describe Rebecca's role in their lives. They had married 2 years ago in a small ceremony in their backyard. with Emma as the flower girl and maid of honor. The legal adoption had been finalized 6 months later, making Rebecca officially what she had always been in their hearts, Emma's mother. At the middle school drop-off, Emma hugged them both goodbye with the easy affection of a child who had never doubted her place in the world. As they watched her walk through the school doors, Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "She's growing up so fast," Rebecca said, taking David's hand. "She's incredible," David replied. "We did good, didn't we?" Rebecca squeezed his hand. "She did good. We just learned how to get out of her way." Later that afternoon, David arrived at Emma's school early for pickup, wanting to hear every detail of her first day. He parked across the street and waited, watching the stream of children emerge from the building. When Emma appeared, she was walking with 2 other girls, laughing at something one of them had said. As David watched his daughter navigate her new social world with confidence and joy, he thought about the security footage that had changed everything 3 years ago. He had been so convinced that Rebecca was a threat, so paranoid about protecting Emma from imaginary dangers, that he had almost lost the greatest gift his family had ever received. Emma spotted David's car and waved excitedly before saying goodbye to her new friends. She climbed into the passenger seat with a huge smile. "How was your first day?" David asked. "Amazing. I made 2 new friends. My English teacher said I have real writing talent, and the cafeteria actually has good food. Oh, and guess what?" "What?" "I told my friends about Mom, about Rebecca, I mean. About how she saved our family and taught you how to be the best dad ever. They think our story is like a movie." David's throat tightened with emotion. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them. That family isn't just who you're born with, it's who chooses to love you every single day." As they drove home through the California hills, Emma chattering about her classes and teachers, David marveled at the wisdom of his 11-year-old daughter. She understood something about love and family that had taken him years to learn. At home, Rebecca was waiting with Emma's favorite after-school snack and eager questions about the day. As Emma recounted every detail of her middle school adventure, David watched the 2 most important people in his life and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, David and Rebecca sat on their front porch swing, the same spot where he had proposed 2 years earlier. The garden Emma had helped them plant was in full bloom, fragrant with jasmine and roses. "Do you ever think about that first day?" David asked. "When I thought you were stalking Emma?" Rebecca laughed softly. "You mean when you were convinced I was some kind of criminal mastermind plotting to kidnap your daughter?" "I was terrified," David admitted. "I thought I had brought danger into our home." "You did bring danger," Rebecca said, surprising him. "You brought the danger of hope, the danger of letting someone love Emma as much as you do, the danger of becoming a real family again." David turned to look at his wife, this remarkable woman who had seen past his grief and fear to the father he could become. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their front porch, David thought about the journey that had brought them here. 3 broken people who had found wholeness in each other. A little girl who had lost her mother but gained a family. A woman who had lost her daughter but found purpose in loving another child. A man who had lost his way but discovered that the most important success was measured in moments like this. Sometimes the security footage shows you exactly what you need to see, even when it's not what you expected. Sometimes the person following your child to school isn't a threat, they're a guardian angel. And sometimes the best families are built not from perfect circumstances, but from imperfect people who choose to love each other through everything. David Richardson had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be protected by security systems or money. They could only be protected by showing up, paying attention, and having the courage to trust in love, even when love came wrapped in unexpected packages. The little girl who used to cry herself to sleep was now a confident young woman who knew without question that she was cherished. The woman who had lost her own daughter had found healing in raising another. And the man who had almost lost everything to his own fear had discovered that the greatest risk was not in loving too much, but in loving too little. In the end, Rebecca Martinez hadn't been following Emma to school because she was dangerous. She had been following her because love makes you do extraordinary things to protect what matters most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those extraordinary acts of love create something even more beautiful than what came before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.